Hello, everyone. Welcome to Steven Shinder Reviews in video form. It's been a minute since the last time I did one of these. Last time I reviewed the first couple episodes of this new series of Doctor Who, the 15th Doctor's season. Yeah, and I know it's been several days since the more recent episode, Boom, which I'm going to talk about on this episode. And there's been a lot of discussion on the episode, so apologies in advance if this review feels more like, in response to some of the reactions to the episode instead of mainly the episode itself. I don't know how balanced it's going to be. This isn't going to be a very long video, because it's not going to be too in depth because of the way my schedule is. But yeah, I've been doing a little bit of traveling around, hence the delay in a little review of the episode. Um, During that time, a friend of mine actually got me this Fourth Doctor Funko Pop, so that was really nice of her. It's really cool. So this episode, Boom, the big thing that well, again, I'm reviewing this episode or responding about it or whatever with the assumption that you've all seen the episode, so I don't need to do a huge plot summary or what have you. I'm just talking about some things that stand out to me in the episode and outside of the episode. So this was the return of Steven Moffat to Doctor Who. Former showrunner during the 11th and 12th Doctors eras, and he'd also written during the first Russell T Davies era. In particular, the episode that everyone knows is Blank, a very popular episode. And over the years, there have been I remember 10 years ago, it felt like everyone was very anti Moffat. So several years later, it was kind of weird seeing how the discourse had shifted and there was a lot of Moffat praise, which felt like it was in response to people disliking the Chibnall slash 13th Doctor era. And, that's kind of something that happens with franchises, I guess. You kind of see it in the Star Wars fandom as well, shifting from uh, all this anti prequel discourse to then going into anti sequel discourse. It's kind of a thing that happens. I'm not a like Stephen Moffat is the best ever type person. I think he's had hits and misses personally. So I'm not really of the camp that seems to be saying Boom is the best Doctor Who episode in years, or that I don't consider it a complete masterpiece like lots of people are saying. Everyone's perception is different, but to me it didn't I didn't vibe with it quite on that level. I thought it was somewhat enjoyable. It had some very interesting themes. It touched on this idea of blind faith, and depending on the circumstances, that could be very dangerous. It touched on capitalism and there's even a bit of AI in there. The premise, the 15th Doctor and Ruby land uh, on this planet in the far flung future. They do say the year, I think it was 5087. And the date, at first I thought that the date might have been May 10th because of the way that date was written out on a casket, 0510. And that made me think that maybe this episode was originally intended to air as the second episode right after Space Babies, on the same day, May 10th, which is when Space Babies and what turned out to be The Devil's Cord aired. And that would make sense because The Devil's Cord takes place after like a half a year of the Doctor and Ruby supposedly traveling, or at least half a year since they started traveling. Maybe there were breaks in between or whatever. But then, looking into it, it seems like the date may have actually, I may have been mistaken, because different parts of the world, like, I don't know why this didn't occur to me right away, put them a date and then the month in that order. So October 5th, and I think the doctor even said October 5th at some point, based on what I was reading. So yeah, but I do still wonder if Boom was intended to air right after Space Babies. Um, because yeah, I don't know. Maybe those answers are out there, maybe they're not. Like, I don't know. I've done so little preparation for this because of how my schedule is, in case you couldn't tell. But yeah, I really enjoyed some things in this episode. Like I mentioned, the themes, the topics it touches on. There is intensity in the doctor, stepping on this landmine. Obviously we know the doctor's not going to die, Ruby's not going to die, and yet I still feel invested seeing, wondering how is the doctor going to solve this. And when Ruby, again, assuming that you've all watched the episode, like I warned you about earlier in this video, Ruby gets shot, and it's very frustrating how this happens, but it's also understandable given how it looks. You know, uh, they're trying to lure the ambulance machine thing away, so it's drawn toward danger and warfare and stuff. So Mundy, character who pops up in this, asks Ruby to shoot her in the arm to like draw the machine toward her. And um, what was the guy's name? The guy who had a crush on Mundy. Um, oh, okay, yeah, it was Kanto. He sees what's going on without knowing the full context and then shoots at Ruby. And we know that Ruby's not gonna die here, but it's still really intense to see for some reason. Um, and there were also some interesting things about the way the doctor's dialogue came across. There was a moment where when he's stepping on the mine and he calls Ruby stupid. I don't remember the exact sentence, but it made me think, oh, that feels more like the doctor in general than I guess what I've come to expect from Shooty's doctor, the 15th doctor, who seems more enlightened post therapy, from the looks of it. And I do still think he is uh, somewhat more enlightened, post therapy, because I was pleasantly surprised that this episode didn't dwell too much on the doctor being, the doctor wasn't talking about being haunted by his past as a soldier. I feel like that was something that was kind of resolved at the end of Moffat's run as showrunner with the 12th Doctor. But the dialogue, some of the dialogue, particularly that like stupid comment, felt very much like something that, for example, the 12th Doctor might say. And I remember in the lead up to this episode airing, there was a quote that I saw from Steven Moffat when he was being interviewed in the lead up, saying that writing for the Doctor, no matter the incarnation, you gotta feel like it's like you're just writing the Doctor in general. So I kind of had that in mind when seeing this. It was interesting, and I guess I can kind of understand with the doctor being in such a high pressure situation, and it. I guess yeah, like if it kind of changes my expectations for this doctor, I guess. And I think it's been changing quite a bit. There's that moment in Space Babies where he laughed at Ruby, which was off putting to me. Like, I didn't really expect that. But there's still like all these other things where he still feels like the heroic doctor. And, that does come across in this episode, especially. And there's also the moment where I think the doctor says to Splice, the daughter of John Francis Vater, John Francis Vater having passed away. The doctor says, nobody rude brings that up, that I'm not even a real doctor. And I honestly couldn't remember if that had been brought up, or maybe he says it doesn't get brought up very often. But this kind of ignited a little bit of discussion online, and at this point, I'm just going with the whole "the doctor lies" thing for stuff like uh, this, and the statements in the previous couple episodes where the doctor is like, I've never seen anything like this before, or never thought to do that before, stuff like that. You know, these really weird lines that seem to negate things that may have already happened in other things or could potentially happen in other stories in the future. So, yeah, I'm just going with the doctor lies on that whole thing. So, thanks to the 11th Doctor's era, I guess. But speaking of Splice, I thought it was really unsettling the way that, Splice is looking for her father, John Francis Vater, and the way she runs at the AI and almost triggers the mine is very frustrating. And it's also unsettling that she never really seems to feel a lot of grief when once confronted with the fact that her father is dead, and she's like, He's not gone, he's just dead," or, that whole thing. And I get it, like, people die but they're still around, and how we still remember them and feel their presence, and maybe they could be somewhere out there, like, just not on this world physically anyway. And it was a nice moment, if somewhat predictable, that the father AI would go into daddy mode and help our heroes here. But I don't know, it just felt really kind of strange how easily Splice accepts this new reality. Um, when Kanto is gone, Mundi is very upset, and there's a whole, like, possibly unrequited love. Kanto was he had these feelings for Mundi, and I honestly can't remember if Mundi had those feelings as well. If she did, she didn't get the chance to tell him while he was alive. And so now Mundi's taking care of Splice, and it's this whole, continuing the theme of adopted family, I suppose. So that's the running theme that's, Russell has taken from the Timeless Child revelation in the 13th Doctor's era, and is continuing that in some ways. There's space babies, for example, and into this. So, yeah, I thought that was fascinating. At the very least, Ruby does acknowledge at the end, like, the strangeness of it. Like, she's like, I get that, he's not really gone, but still. And, there's at least they threw in that little interaction there, between her and the doctor. Um, and but when it comes to the caskets, did no one designing these things, or, like, realize what they look like? Like, who was in charge of all of that, and why? Why? Like, so such a goofy thing to. That's not even the right word for it. It's just, ugh, like, nobody caught that. Like, what? It's, geez. All right, but getting past that, um, yeah, there was also this, like I mentioned earlier, this whole thing of, really, it's been half a year and Ruby has not visited a planet yet. And that goes back to this speculation that maybe this was supposed to be earlier in the running order, like pre Devil's Cord. But, if this is now supposed to take place after Devil's Cord, I guess that whenever Big Finish get around to exploring that half a year gap, they'll have to throw in a reason for why they don't go to other planets. Like, maybe, I don't know, maybe Ruby is sort of cautious about that at first. Maybe there's some event that happens that sort of puts her off from wanting to see another planet right away. So I don't know. I'm sure they've got several years to come up with something, I guess. Um, yeah, and this episode also at the end there is sort of a callback to the end of Twice Upon a Time. You know, whenever there's that salute, it reminded me of that moment when the Lethbridge Stewart in World War I gives the 12th Doctor a salute, and it's the same exact music from that moment as well. And then we see the snowflake, which not only calls back to those Christmassy vibes of that, and but also reminds us that there that whole memory thing that the Doctor the 15th Doctor looked at this memory from back when Ruby was left, and the snow kind of entered like the present somehow. So it's a little reminder of some stuff going on that we don't fully understand yet. But yeah, this and the Devil's Chord both reminded me of Twice Upon a Time. You know, the Devil's Chord with its assertion that music can save people. So kind of interesting to have these two episodes back to back. But yeah, I thought it was a somewhat enjoyable episode. And again, I mentioned the gripes that I had, the frustrating moments. But there was still some good stuff in this episode. And I am not one of those people who is saying that this episode is so good that Steven Moffat should be the showrunner after this Russell T Davies era. Like, no, just no. If you want to bring him back as a guest writer, like for this, and what I've been hearing is the next Christmas special might be written by him, that's fine. But we can't just be stuck in this cycle of using the same showrunners. I want the next showrunner to be someone else. Someone, I know people might say, oh, but these people are trustworthy. They know how to run it before. But I think we need to take chances. So, yeah, I thought this was an interesting ride of an episode. The revelation that there are no Castarians at all. I kind of saw coming a little bit before that reveal. But I mean, it's kind of like the Devil's Chord, right? They had to write around the fact that Beatles music is expensive, so came up with a plot based around that. So for this, they had to come up with something because they couldn't afford real Castarians for this episode, right? um, but yeah, I do think it does reinforce the theme of this episode. People are sent to war, or maybe they just do things in general just because of this belief of a certain enemy, and like the enemy isn't there, the enemy is from within. It's the machine basically. And I've been seeing comparisons between this episode and Kerblam. It's been a while since I've seen Kerblam, but the general consensus seems to be that this did the anti-capitalist message more effectively. And there's discourse on all of that, like all over the online sphere. But overall, this episode, again, it's somewhat enjoyable. I was thinking maybe I enjoyed it slightly more than The Devil's Chord, or maybe it's on par. I think because of the things that I found frustrating that sort of bog it down for me. I'm gonna give this episode a 7.5 out of 10. I'm still invested. I'm still intrigued to see what happens next. What the overall arc will be like by the end. I know that like there's this whole thing about how Susan Twist might just be an actress they're reusing and maybe not uh, as important as people are thinking. I'm not 100% sure. I'm not trying to stay too invested in one idea over the other, but I'm interested to see how this plays out. So yeah, those are my thoughts on Boom. Looking forward to the next episode, and see you all next time.